And I want to bring in Terry Austin from the Law and Crime Network for more legal analysis of the trial and where we are now. Terry, thanks for being here. We've, at this point, heard from 45 witnesses throughout this trial. Who do you think in that group had the biggest impact on this case?
Good morning, Diane. I think a number of them were very impactful on the prosecution side. I have to admit the bystander who kept saying to George Floyd, listen, man, do what they want you to do. Charles McMillan, he was the first one on the stand who actually brought tears to his eyes, and I think brought tears to the eyes of the jury. So he was very moving, very impactful. I think also that the prosecution is going to want to raise in their closing arguments testimony from the use of force experts, particularly as it relates to Steiger and Sergeant Pfluger. Pfluger was the one who was called to the scene by the 911 dispatcher, and I think his testimony was very important. He basically said that at the time George Floyd stopped moving, Chauvin should have removed his restraint from his body. And I think Steiger was excellent as an expert, and that stood out in my mind because he was able to say this was against policy and this was excessive use of force. As far as the defense witnesses were concerned, I did not think they were very moving or very impactful. I do think that the one who was called back, Nicole McKenzie, was called back because of the excited delirium, and that was an interesting theory, and I think the jury might have hung on to that as well. They probably also hung on to Dr. Fowler, but I don't think he was positive for the defense because I think Jerry Blackwell's cross-examination of Dr. Fowler really put some holes in the argument as far as the defense was concerned in terms of the cause of death.
And I imagine testimony from Dr. Martin Tobin is going to play a key role in the closing arguments today. What do you think are some of the keys that the prosecution is going to want to highlight today as they try to sum this whole thing up for the jury?
Well, you hit it on the head, Diane, as always, because he cannot talk about, or the prosecution, it looks like there might be two of them who will be giving the summations, but it can't be over and over and repetitive and redundant because you don't want to lose the jury. So I do think that the prosecution is going to hone in on, as far as the medical evidence, Dr. Tobin, because he was excellent. He, in fact, said to the jury, look, you can put your hand on your neck and you can squeeze it. We don't need to do tests to see whether or not your airway is blocked when you put your hand on your neck, because you can tell from common sense that that is what is going to occur. So he had a number of moments like that, and he made it very clear to the jury that George Floyd died because of this low oxygen, because of the compression both on his neck and his back from the individuals who were restraining George Floyd. So I do think that they will spend some time during the closing on the testimony of Dr. Tobin because he made it simple and he made it clear.
And what about the defense? What are some of the key points you think that Eric Nelson needs to focus on here to try to raise reasonable doubt?
One of the things Eric Nelson said in his opening, and I think he will repeat this in his closing, is, look, it's more than just 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He's trying to establish the fact that his client was dealing with a multitude of issues, not the least of which, in his opinion, was the crowd, and making sure that the crowd didn't interfere and that they didn't get too overly rowdy. And so he's using that, and he's saying that Derek Chauvin followed police procedure. He followed policy, and he was concerned that George Floyd might just come back and have this extra strength, which is why he did not remove the restraint. So he's going to try to argue that the drug use also caused his death, that he, you might recall, introduced the May 2019 evidence to show that this is what George Floyd does. He uses drugs. This probably caused to his death. And so they're going to use all of that. And then the last thing that Nelson is definitely going to talk about is George Floyd's heart and how that, too, contributed to his death.
Let's run through the charges, because Chauvin is charged with second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. So what are some of the main points the jury needs to consider for each of those charges?
Well, for the unintentional murder, which is the second degree, they're going to have to show that there was an assault. And in fact, the assault was intentional, and they're going to have to show that what Chauvin was doing was assaulting George Floyd. He didn't intend to kill him, but by keeping his restraint on top of the body, that was an assault, and that ended up in the death of George Floyd. As far as the second degree, he has to show that there was a depraved mind, that Chauvin did not care about the individual, and all of the evidence having to do with the duty of care that was never given to George Floyd, I think is going to influence the jury as far as that's concerned. The second-degree manslaughter, all of the information you saw about the unreasonable use of force, the negligence that we saw because he didn't remove the restraint. And I think the jury is going to look at all of that, and they will be able to come to the conclusion that, in fact, Chauvin was unreasonable, that at the point where there was no pulse, there was no breathing, there was no moving, there was no resistance, and yet Chauvin did not remove the restraint from George Floyd. And I think, if nothing else, Diane, we will see a manslaughter. I think, all in all, that the case has been proven by the prosecution, but I am not positive that the jury is going to come back with the top count of the murder counts. But I think that it will be a bit easier for them to justify the manslaughter.
All right. Law and Crime host, legal analyst Terry Austin. Terry, always great to have your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
And we'll see you again soon when court resumes this morning for closing arguments. We will carry that live here when it happens on ABC News Live.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.